Have you ever felt like you carry the whole world on your shoulders, as if your history, your anxieties, and your regrets are binding you in place? You are not the only one. In a life that rarely pauses, we seldom ask whether the peace we chase might not be in holding on but in learning how to release. This is not merely a manual. Consider it an open invitation to let go of what weighs you down so you can finally breathe. Welcome to the craft of releasing what no longer serves you. Start here. Picture yourself at the rim of a still pond. The water lies quiet and flawless, like a mirror. Then you toss a pebble, a single thought, and the surface shivers. You throw another, and another. Before long, the stillness is gone. That is what obsessive thinking feels like. It is more than thinking too much. It is analyzing, replaying, forecasting, doubting, and rehearsing scenes that may never occur. It is a looping treadmill inside your head that robs you of calm, freezes action, and saps your energy. Yet many of us accept it as part of being conscientious, intelligent, or prepared. Here is the reality. Overanalysis is a learned pattern, not an innate trait. Habits can be unlearned. One reason we drown in thought is the illusion that meticulous scrutiny grants us control over outcomes. We want to avoid mistakes, pain, and remorse. We want to be ready for anything. But life does not reward over-preparation, it rewards being present. Excess thinking hands us a counterfeit sense of control and steals our capacity to respond with clarity. Instead of solving real problems, we fabricate new ones in the theater of our minds. Rather than protecting ourselves, we lock ourselves inside fear and indecision. Our brains evolved for survival, not guaranteed happiness. That means they constantly search for danger, whether it is real or imagined. This bias toward the negative explains why 10 compliments can be overshadowed by a single critique and why your mind keeps replaying that awkward conversation from last week. Overanalysis is the modern brain's outdated attempt to keep us safe. The threats we face now are mostly emotional: rejection, shame, failure. The brain treats them like physical peril and can become stuck in repetitive loops. Letting go does not mean erasing memory or pretending events never happened. It means choosing peace instead of chaos. It means loosening your grip on what you cannot steer, other people, what's already happened, the unknown ahead, and redirecting your energy toward the one thing you can influence: how you respond. Releasing is a skill that grows with practice. Pause now and take a deliberate breath. Breathe in slowly. Hold it for a beat. Exhale with intention. Notice the thoughts that surface. Do not fight them. Do not label them. Simply observe them passing by. This awareness is the first act of letting go. When you notice your mind spiraling, you create distance between you and your thoughts. You are not identical to every thought that appears, you become the witness. Consider a story. A marketing manager named Sarah used to replay every small error until it haunted her for days. A single typo would trigger thoughts like, "What will my boss think? Did I ruin the campaign? Will I lose my job?" Her anxiety climbed until she adopted a simple nightly ritual. She spent 5 minutes writing everything that worried her, without judging or filtering. Over time she recognized patterns and saw how rarely her fears became reality. She began to say to herself, "That is only a thought, not a fact." Those words gave her room to breathe. Her world did not have to change for her confidence to grow, her mind did. Try a practical habit yourself: the thought purge. Each morning or before bed, take a notebook, set a timer for 5 minutes, and write every idea racing through your head without editing. Close the book when the timer ends. This exercise is not meant to fix problems but to clear mental clutter the way you close unused apps on your phone. You do not need to remain captive to each idea that passes through your head. You do not have to dissect every instant. You do not have to spend your life in mental gridlock. Choosing to let go is choosing clarity over chaos, calm over panic. It begins with one conscious breath, one small pause, one deliberate choice. You do not have to be a prisoner of your thoughts. You can step out of mental traffic and into a calmer way forward. Speak kindly to the part of you that struggles. Your inner dialogue shapes your reality and can be trained. Notice the tone you use with yourself. If your internal voice constantly tells you you are inadequate, your brain begins to accept that narrative, leading to hesitation, inaction, and later, regret. Yet the same mechanism can work in your favor. Thoughtful, encouraging self-talk is not hollow positivity, it is purposeful mental conditioning. When critical inner chatter arises, try shifting from blame to curiosity. Instead of asking, "Why did I say that? And what a fool I was," try asking, "What can I learn from that moment? What went well today? What could go differently next time?" Curiosity invites solutions rather than shame. A simple strategy some people use is a gentle physical cue tied to a reframed thought. For example, when Mark, an engineer, noticed negative thoughts, he would gently snap a rubber band on his wrist and replace the doom loop with an empowering sentence like "I am learning," or "I did my best today." Over weeks those small rewrites changed how he showed up. He spoke more often in meetings and eventually pitched an idea adopted by his company. The voice in your head matters, cultivate it as an ally, not an enemy. One method that helps is to externalize that critical voice by naming it. Call it Doubtful Dan or Anxious Annie. When it starts to rant, remark mentally, "Oh, that is Dan again." Naming separates you from the thought and drains its authority. It reminds you that the criticism is a habit, not a truth. Build a compassionate mindset deliberately. Before sleep, jot 3 things you did well that day. When judgmental thoughts appear, ask yourself if you would say the same thing to a friend. Replace harshness with realistic kindness. Instead of declaring, "I am lazy," try, "Today was hard, but I showed up as best as I could." Much of what we call self-criticism is rooted in a pursuit of perfection. Perfectionism convinces us that unless everything is flawless, it is worthless. Shift the aim to progress. Embrace the messy, awkward, honest elements of growth. Mistakes do not signal failure, they mark effort. Train your inner coach to speak supportively rather than scold. Remember that every word you direct at yourself matters. Speak softly, speak with care, speak as if you are someone worth listening to, because you are. The practice of releasing is not about reinventing who you are, it is about remembering the person you were before the world taught you to doubt. It begins by changing the conversation inside your mind. Picture walking through life carrying a backpack that felt light at first but gained weight with every hurt, betrayal, and disappointment. Each painful moment added a brick until your posture bowed and your energy dwindled. That burden is emotional baggage, and if you never learn to unpack it, it follows you like a shadow. Emotional baggage is the accumulation of unresolved feelings from earlier chapters of your life, grief, shame, guilt, anger, heartbreak, that you drag into the present. It shapes how you view yourself, how you treat others, and how you decide. Most people carry it without even noticing, mistaking the load for a normal part of being human. They wear it like armor, believing it protects them, while in truth it restricts them. Letting go requires brave honesty. It means unzipping that backpack and peering inside, asking what's still there and why you're clinging to it. We hold on for reasons that feel rational but are often rooted in fear. We cling because we worry that letting go equals forgetting, that releasing pain means losing part of ourselves. Sometimes the story of our suffering becomes our identity. I am the one who was abandoned, I am always the heartbroken one. Those truths can be unlearned. You are not your wounds. You are the person who survived them. Consider a woman named Lena who carried the sting of early betrayal into a new relationship. Simple acts, a partner running late for 5 minutes or a delayed message, triggered spirals of suspicion. It took an honest admission, "I am still carrying the hurt of someone who is no longer in my life," for her to begin disentangling the past from the present. Therapy, journaling, and gentle self-compassion helped her shift the meaning she attached to memories. She didn't erase the events, she stopped letting them dictate how she experienced love now. Emotions are messengers, not punishers. Grief signals that something mattered. Anger points to crossed boundaries. Shame highlights places needing repair. Once you listen to what the feeling wants to teach you, you can release it. There is no need to keep rereading a painful chapter once the lesson has been learned. Holding unprocessed feelings has physical, mental, and relational costs. You may find yourself overreacting to small triggers, carrying chronic tension, struggling to sleep, or feeling anxious without a clear cause. These signs are your body and mind asking for decluttering. A practical exercise to begin this work is an emotional inventory. Set aside a quiet quarter of an hour. Sit in stillness, breathe, and ask yourself which pains you still carry. Whose voice keeps replaying in your head? What memory still stings? Write without filtering. Let the full list come out. Then go deeper and ask, what do I need to express that I never did? Maybe you need to write a letter you will never send. Maybe you simply need to speak the truth out loud in a safe space. This kind of emotional decluttering is essential because you cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge. Release does not require reconciliation with the person who caused the hurt. It does not mean excusing harmful acts. Instead, it means making peace with the memory and reclaiming your emotional real estate. Forgiveness is not about saying what happened was acceptable. It is about accepting that you are no longer willing to carry the weight of it. Think of forgiveness as a key you give to yourself. When you choose not to carry resentment or guilt, you reclaim energy for your life. Forgiveness often frees you more than it frees the person who hurt you. It can be helpful to create a ritual to mark the decision to let go. Write a letter to the person who hurt you. Start with gratitude for any lessons or for the good that once existed. Acknowledge the pain and then state clearly that you are releasing it. You might tear the letter up, burn it in a safe way, or fold it and put it in a place that symbolizes letting go. The physical action signals to your brain that you're shifting your relationship to the memory. Many people fear being alone if they leave relationships that no longer serve them. They stay out of habit or because loneliness seems worse than the daily strain of staying. But solitude and loneliness are not the same. You can be alone and peaceful, and you can be surrounded and still feel empty. Letting go of an unhealthy relationship creates space in your life for people who see you, choose you, and add to your energy rather than draining it. The fear of losing time, investment, or identity is understandable, but the cost of remaining is often higher. If you constantly feel depleted, walk on eggshells, or are always the one initiating contact, those dynamics are worth evaluating. A simple exercise to decide whether to hold on or let go is to imagine meeting that person for the first time today. Would you want them in your life now, given who you are and what you need? Many people find clarity in this imagined experiment. If the answer is no, it may be time to step away gently and without drama. You don't owe the other person constant explanation or punishment. You owe yourself peace. You can let someone go and still wish them well, free from the need for retribution. Guilt and shame deserve a careful, compassionate approach because they often masquerade as moral responsibility. Guilt speaks to actions, I did something wrong, and can be constructive when it leads to repair. Shame, on the other hand, speaks to identity, I am wrong. Shame convinces you that you are unworthy of love and healing, and it can be crippling. Many of these patterns find their roots in childhood. A careless adult blamed you for something that wasn't your fault, a teacher humiliated you, or a caregiver withheld comfort. Those early experiences can carve grooves of self-blame that follow you into adulthood. Consider a story of someone named Priya who carried guilt after leaving a relationship that no longer fit her. She replayed the decision for years, asking whether she had hurt her former partner too much or acted selfishly. Therapy helped her see that guilt is not always truth, sometimes it is conditioning. She hadn't been selfish, she had chosen her well-being. Unlearning these scripts can be liberating. The first step is acknowledging the feeling without declaring it your identity. Say, I feel guilty, rather than, I am guilty. That linguistic shift creates space to analyze whether the charge is actually yours to carry. Ask, is this mine to hold? Some guilt is projected responsibility, blame given to you for another person's feelings. If you have genuinely caused harm, make amends where possible. Apologize, repair, and then allow yourself to move forward. But avoid over-apologizing to the point of denying your own needs. Own your part honestly, but do not take on blame that is not yours. Self-forgiveness is a practice. Repeat forgiveness aloud and in writing. Create a release statement you can read when old shame surfaces. I forgive myself for carrying guilt that no longer serves me. I release the belief that suffering proves my goodness. Then take a symbolic action, tear the paper, burn the words, or bury them, something that helps your body register the intention. Shame-based thoughts often feel absolute, I am not enough. Counter them with factual, compassionate responses, I am human. I have made mistakes. I remain worthy of love and peace. Over time, these responses rewire your internal narrative. Treat yourself with the same tenderness you would extend to a friend. Replace harsh inner verdicts with honest, gentle assessments. Today was difficult, and I did my best. You are not required to earn forgiveness. You are allowed to grow beyond past choices. Another weight many of us carry is the need for control. Control feels safe because it promises predictability. We plan, micromanage, and try to steer outcomes to reduce uncertainty. But the more we attempt to force life into a fixed path, the more stress and resistance we create. Surrendering control is not passivity. It is active acceptance, focusing on your response instead of trying to dictate everything around you. Think of a river moving around rocks without fighting them. When you practice letting go of excessive control, you create room for flow. Trust does not require blind faith in an outcome, it asks you to believe in your capacity to navigate whatever arises. Letting go is not surrender to chaos. It is choosing your bandwidth wisely. Worrying about every potential outcome is a poor investment of time and energy. Choose actions in the areas you can influence, your attitude, your efforts, your priorities, and release the rest. When you do this, you notice a reduction in anxiety and an increase in presence. You become nimble and more open to opportunities you couldn't have scripted. Another common chain is perfectionism, which keeps you frozen in a loop of endless tweaks, second-guessing, and procrastination. Perfectionism is the enemy of momentum. It insists that unless something is flawless, it is worthless. The antidote is to reframe success as progress and to celebrate imperfection as evidence of courage. Give yourself permission to try and fall short, to learn, and to adjust. Each misstep is data, not a verdict. A key practice for releasing the past and stepping into the present is to anchor yourself in the immediate senses. Name 3 things you see, 2 you hear, 1 you feel. Focus on your breath. When your attention drifts to future fears or past regrets, gently guide it back without judgment. Mindfulness is not about perfect concentration, it is about compassionately returning your awareness to now, again and again. Gratitude is another practical tool. When you notice simple, present positives, a warm cup of tea, a quiet moment, a kind word, you weaken the mind's habit of amplifying lack. Letting go is ultimately an act of reclaiming your life. It is pruning what no longer serves so new growth has space. It is choosing to stop carrying stories that keep you small. It is deciding that your future does not have to be ruled by old hurt. You can clear the backpack, brick by brick, and walk more freely. Momentum builds when you make small, intentional decisions to release, a thought dump, a written release, a boundary set, an apology made, a ritual performed. Over time, these actions compound into the lighter way of living you deserve. If a phrase or channel name ever comes up in these practices, replace that reference with the idea of steady growth and reliable resources. Think of it as the voice of Momentum Audiobooks guiding the journey forward. You have replayed the same scene in your head until it feels like a worn-out record. You have imagined worst-case outcomes so many times that fear becomes familiar and action feels risky. This is the loop, a repetitive mental pattern that keeps you stuck. Its promise is safety. If you rehearse enough, you think, you'll avoid pain. The truth is the loop is theft, it steals time, energy, and opportunity. Breaking it starts with a single decision to interrupt the pattern and choose motion over rumination. First, notice the pattern without shame. Awareness is not a moral failing, it's an essential tool. When you catch yourself spiraling, treat the observation like a fact: my mind is looping. Naming the behavior takes its edge away. From there, practical strategies offer the path forward. Short deadlines force decisions out of the endless gray. Give yourself a clear cutoff: decide by 6 o'clock, by the end of the day, or by the weekend. Open-ended options are invitations to keep thinking. Timelines create forward momentum. Limit the torrent of input. More information rarely equals better decisions when your mind is already overburdened. Curate what you consume. Stop exhausting yourself reading every review, consulting every opinion, or revisiting every possible variant. Choose the essentials, then act. Momentum is more instructive than endless planning. Clarity often arrives after you move. Accept that waiting for readiness is a delaying strategy. You will not feel perfectly prepared, the ideal sense of readiness rarely arrives. Instead, welcome imperfection as a condition of progress. Take imperfect action, then iterate. Send the email with a few rough edges. Publish the first version of your idea. Apply for the job and learn from whatever happens. Action produces feedback, and feedback produces better decisions. Clarity often follows doing, not thinking. Grounding practices pull you back when the future or past grabs your attention. A simple sensory anchor can bring you into the present. Look around and name 3 things you see, 2 things you hear, 1 thing you feel. Feel the texture of your chair, the temperature on your skin, the motion of your breath. These small moments of embodied attention interrupt cognitive spirals and reconnect you with reality, now. Create mantras that counter the loop's argument. When obsessive doubts rise, speak a concise truth: not everything requires a perfect answer. I trust myself to handle what happens. You have survived every previous worry you rehearsed into being. That simple fact is a resource. Remind yourself of it when fear poses impossible scenarios. Real-life pressure meets these strategies most effectively when paired with accountability. Tell a trusted person your decision deadline and ask them to check in. The social contract raises the stakes and reduces the temptation to stall. If asking someone feels risky, commit to a small public act, post a short update, share a progress snapshot, or schedule a calendar event labeled action. The visible marker nudges you forward. Recognize the real cost of inaction. While you mull over possibilities, someone else is experimenting, failing, learning, and refining. Momentum matters more than flawless foresight. Decide what level of risk you can tolerate, then move. The experience you gain will teach you far more than theoretical consideration. Every misstep becomes data, not a final judgment. Learning to tolerate uncertainty is a muscle. Start with micro-experiments. If a big leap scares you, take a quarter step instead. Talk to one person about your idea, test a headline, or prototype a fragment. Each tiny success builds confidence and expands your tolerance for risk. Over time, you'll find that uncertainty loses some of its terror and becomes a field for curiosity. Your relationship with failure needs reframing. Failure is not a verdict on your worth. It is a narrow but helpful signal about what didn't work. Treat it like a lab result: observe what went wrong, adjust, and try again. The stories you tell about failure determine whether it becomes a barrier or a stepping stone. Reframe mistakes as learning events and your brain will begin to treat them as opportunities instead of threats. Some people use structured rituals to force a pattern change. Pick a time each day to do the work you are avoiding and honor that window like an appointment. Reduce friction by making the first step ridiculously easy: open the document, write a headline, draft a single paragraph. Progress compounds. The first paragraph loosens resistance to the second, and the second to the third. Before you know it, you have momentum. Another technique is the thought dump: extend it into action. When anxious thinking repeats, write everything down in a single sitting. Don't edit, don't filter. Once the torrent is out of your head and on the page, scan for patterns. Is the anxiety about what could happen, or about how you would feel if something did happen? Separate concerns you can influence from speculative fears. Create a 2-column plan, one column for actions you can take now, the second for things you will monitor without trying to control them. This exercise turns vague dread into concrete tasks and places the unchangeable in a different mental box. Reduce the power of the loop by building a stable daily baseline. Sleep, movement, nutrition, and intentional rest are not luxuries, they are the scaffolding of a calm mind. When your body is regulated, your cognition follows. Exercise needn't be extreme, a short walk, some gentle stretches, or 5 minutes of breath work will lower reactivity and improve decision-making. Reclaim mental bandwidth by pruning decisions. Automate small choices so your cognitive energy is reserved for the things that truly matter. Create routines for morning and evening, standardize small tasks, and free up the space your higher-order thinking needs for meaningful challenges. The less your mind fights the trivial, the more it can solve the essential. When criticism or past mistakes fuel your loop, shift from self-blame to curiosity. Ask, what did I learn? What will I do differently next time? Curiosity opens pathways to improvement, blame locks you into shame. And when the inner critic grows loud, remind yourself you are not the voice. Observe it, name it, and then turn your attention to the next actionable step. In situations where overthinking escalates into anxiety that disrupts functioning, professional support is a wise and practical option. Therapists and coaches offer tools tailored to your patterns and can shorten the learning curve. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it's a resourceful move toward growth. Finally, create an identity shift. Instead of seeing yourself as someone who spins in circles, choose to see yourself as a person who decides, learns, and moves. Identity is not fixed, it is built by repeated acts. Each time you interrupt the loop and take action, you reinforce a new self-image. Over time, the habit of motion replaces the habit of rumination. There is no single magic to end overthinking. There is consistent practice, ritual, and small acts of courage. The loop loses its grip when you stop consenting to it. Choose motion over replay. Choose imperfect action over perfect preparation. Choose presence over paradox. Momentum follows the first step. Replace any reference to a channel or guiding voice with the steady, practical friend that helps ideas turn into action. Momentum Audiobooks. You know the feeling, your chest tightens when someone's reaction matters more than the truth, your stomach knots at the thought of losing control, and your mind rehearses every possible misstep. Letting go of people isn't just about ending relationships, it's about choosing your own well-being over attachment to what used to be. Some people enter your life to bless you, others to teach you a lesson, and some simply outstay their purpose. Recognizing which role someone plays is one of the most practical acts of self-respect you can perform. Outgrowing relationships is normal. Not every friend, lover, or relative is meant to travel every mile with you. Growth reshapes priorities, values, and needs. The person you once bonded with may remain fundamentally different from who you are becoming. That doesn't always mean blame or betrayal, it means evolution. When you accept that not everyone must come with you to the next stage, space opens for relationships that match the person you are now. The resistance to letting go is often emotional bookkeeping. You measure time invested, shared history, and the identity you formed around the relationship. You fear the social cost, the judgment, the loneliness. You hope the relationship will return to its earlier shape and believe that if you hold on long enough, the other person will change. But waiting for someone to become who you hoped they'd be is a risky bet. People change only when they choose to, and you cannot cajole another person into growth without sacrificing pieces of yourself. A clear signal that it might be time to step back is persistent depletion. If interactions leave you exhausted, anxious, or diminished, notice that pattern. If you are always the one reaching out, negotiating peace, or lowering standards to maintain harmony, the balance is off. Another sign is walking on eggshells, modifying your words and behavior to avoid conflict or upset. That constant vigilance erodes authenticity and joy. Letting go is not about hostility. It's about refusing to make your survival dependent on someone else's unwillingness to meet you where you are. You also don't need someone else's permission to let go. Closure is a luxury, not a requirement. Many endings never come with explanation, apology, or acknowledgement. Writing a goodbye letter you will never send can be a surprisingly effective way to give yourself the farewell you didn't receive. Start with gratitude for what was real and then name what no longer serves. Conclude with a clear, compassionate statement of your intention to move forward. The act is symbolic, but symbols changes brain chemistry. The ritual marks a psychological boundary and signals to your nervous system that it is safe to release. Fear of being alone is a potent force that keeps people stuck. But solitude is often where you relearn your boundaries, preferences, and true desires. Being alone allows you to become comfortable with yourself, to fill your own well, rather than consuming someone else's. The right company doesn't demand parts of you as collateral. It complements and expands who you are. When you make room for that kind of people, you trade scarcity for abundance. There is a kind of courage in choosing yourself. It is not dramatic, it is quiet and steady. It might look like reducing contact, setting firm boundaries, or having a heartfelt conversation where you state your truth without expecting a response. It might look like walking away with grace and without a speech. Either way, letting go is an act of clarity. You decide what you will no longer tolerate because you value your own peace more than the story of who you should be because of someone else. Setting boundaries is a powerful tool in this process. Boundaries are not punishment. They are declarations of what is safe for you. When someone crosses them repeatedly, your calm is not negotiable. Say no when you mean no. Say yes when you mean yes. The consistency of your boundaries teaches others how to treat you and gradually reshapes the relationships you keep. Sometimes letting go requires confronting the part of you that equates worth with tolerance. Many people believe that enduring mistreatment proves loyalty or virtue. That belief is a cultural myth rather than a moral truth. Choosing to protect your heart is not selfish, it is responsible. You cannot pour from an empty cup. The people who value what you provide will not insist you diminish yourself to keep their comfort. If ending a relationship is complicated by shared responsibilities, children, or communal life, the process may require slower, negotiated change rather than abrupt removal. You can still prioritize your well-being while honoring practical obligations. Create functional boundaries, designate neutral times for interaction, and seek support for logistics. Emotional detachment can be practiced even while logistical ties remain intact. Letting go also involves changing how you narrate the ending. Instead of telling a self-critical story, I failed, I gave up, I am weak, choose a kinder script, I chose my peace. I honored my limits. I am protecting my future. Language shapes identity. The words you use will determine whether the ending becomes a mark of shame or a milestone of growth. After the separation, the healing work begins. Allow yourself to grieve what's lost without conflating grief with failure. Mourning a relationship is natural. Give the feeling time, write through it, speak honestly to a trusted friend, and create small rituals that affirm your evolving self. Over time, the absence will stop feeling like a wound and become an empty room where new life can move in. If you struggle with the moral complexity of leaving, remind yourself that staying is not inherently virtuous. Remaining in a damaging dynamic for the sake of appearances or duty fuels resentment and often harms others more than it helps. Compassion includes caring for yourself. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do for others is to accept that the relationship cannot be sustained in good faith. Forgiveness plays a subtle role here. You can forgive without returning. When you forgive, you release the energy that keeps you tethered to the past. Forgiveness is for your freedom, not for the person who caused the hurt. It allows you to step into your future lightened by mercy rather than heavy with grievance. There are practical steps to make this transition smoother. Create a safety plan for the immediate aftermath if a relationship is abusive or dangerous. Seek help from professionals if needed. If the relationship is simply unhealthy, curate a support circle, friends who reflect your worth back to you, activities that fill your days with meaning, and small routines that anchor you. Replace time spent preserving a dying connection with practices that build your capacity for joy, exercise, creative expression, or learning something new. These practices are not distractions but restorations. Knowing when to re-engage is also part of maturity. Some endings leave room for future reconnection under different terms, but this should be considered only if the other person demonstrates change and respects boundaries. Reconciliation without transformation can repeat old patterns. If you find your heart longing for a prior connection, ask whether you're missing the person or the comfort of familiarity. Longing is normal, nostalgia is not always truth. Every ending contains seeds of new beginnings. When one door closes, you gain a different kind of freedom to explore, to invite healthier relationships, and to become more yourself. The work of letting go is essentially an act of self-preservation that creates capacity for life that sustains rather than depletes you. If any guidance or a trusted voice helps shape your outlook on endings, imagine it as a steady resource that keeps you moving forward. Think of it as the practical, encouraging presence of momentum audiobook supporting your steps toward clearer, kinder choices. You carry weights you never signed up for, remorse that keeps repeating like a scratched record, a quiet shame that whispers you are less than others, or a persistent sense that you must atone forever for choices made in imperfect moments. Guilt tells you did something wrong, shame insists you are wrong. The difference is profound because guilt can be reparative while shame corrodes identity. Letting go of these burdens is not a single heroic act but a steady series of small, honest decisions that return your life to the present and your worth to you. Begin by separating feeling from identity. When guilt surfaces, practice naming it as a feeling rather than a verdict. I feel guilty right now, instead of I am a bad person. That subtle grammatical shift gives you psychological distance and invites curiosity rather than condemnation. Ask practical questions you can answer. What did I do? Whom did I hurt? Can I make amends? If the answer is yes, take the concrete steps to repair harm where possible. Apologize sincerely, make restitution, and then allow the action to complete its work. If you cannot make amends because the person is unavailable or the harm cannot be undone, choose the difficult but liberating route of making meaning from what happened. What have you learned, and how will you act differently now? Recognize when guilt has been given to you by others as a way to control behavior. Some people use shame or blame to manipulate. Ask yourself whether the guilt you feel is truly yours to hold. Sometimes an uncomfortable feeling is the residue of someone else's expectations or misapplied standards. If the responsibility does not belong to you, return it gently. Saying to yourself, "This is not mine to carry," is an act of boundary setting as much as it is an emotional strategy. Shame, by contrast, thrives in secrecy. Shame wants you to believe you are alone in your flaw. The antidote is exposure. Tell one trusted person something small and painful and watch how human response reframes your story. More often than not, the person listening will respond with compassion rather than contempt, and that response weakens shame's power. Choosing to be seen in your imperfect moments teaches your brain a different truth. Vulnerability invites connection, not rejection. Create small rituals that physically mark forgiveness and release. Write the story that plays on loop in your mind onto paper until your hand is tired. Then write at the end, "I forgive myself for holding this, I release it now." Rip the paper, burn it safely, bury it in a pot of soil, or fold it and tuck it away. The sensory action helps your nervous system accept what your intellect intends. Words create intention, actions create embodiment. Remember that making amends does not mean punishing yourself indefinitely. Some people atone by endless self-denial, equating suffering with virtue. This is not ethical growth, it is avoidance of acceptance. True restitution includes learning, changing behavior, and restoring your life. You are allowed to live fully after you have done what you can to repair harm. Forgiving yourself does not erase responsibility, it completes it. Another heavy anchor is the fear of change. Change rattles our sense of safety because it removes predictability. Yet the very matrix of growth is built from change. When you lean into the reality that life is designed to move from one shape to another, fear shifts from an enemy into a signal. Something important is at stake, and that is often where growth lives. Meet that fear with curiosity. Ask, what is the smallest step I can take that honors this impulse? When the step is tiny, the neurochemical storm of fear softens and you can proceed. Over time, these microleaps build a new tolerance for uncertainty so that the unknown becomes less threatening and more like an unfolding field to explore. Practice reframing change from loss to exchange. Yes, you leave something behind when you step forward, but you also gain new possibilities. Imagine packing a suitcase for a long journey. You might have to leave some familiar items at home, yet the space you create makes room for discoveries you could never have taken with you. When decisions are reframed this way, you can hold the grief for what you left while remaining open to what arrives next. Living in the present is the single most practical antidote to both shame and fear. The past is a set of events that cannot be altered, and the future is a projection that may never materialize. All you have truly is now. Anchor yourself to the breath, to the sensations in your body, and to the details of your immediate environment. Notice the temperature of the air, the sound of distant traffic, the feeling of your feet on the floor. These small moments are tools. They dislodge obsessive loops and pull you back into a life that is actually happening. Mindfulness is less about achieving perfect focus and more about practicing the return. Your mind will wander. The point is to notice the wandering and gently guide your attention back. Each time you do so, you build the neural pathway of presence. Over weeks and months, those tiny reconnections change how you live. You begin to experience time not as a battleground to control but as a resource to steward. Perfectionism is a close cousin to shame. It convinces you that only flawlessness deserves celebration. The cost is a life half-lived, always rehearsing rather than showing up. Counter perfectionism by celebrating tries, not just wins. Keep a small list of attempts you made that day, no matter how flawed, and honestly name what went well in each. Over time, the habit trains your brain to value effort and learning, not merely outcomes. When you consistently reward process, your identity shifts from, I must be perfect, to, I am someone who grows. Embrace the idea that imperfection is the raw material of creativity and connection. When you present work that is not yet polished, you invite feedback, collaboration, and iteration. The most interesting conversations start with prototypes, not perfected final products. Think of your life as a series of drafts. There will always be room to refine but no reason to wait to begin. Control is another heavy theme. We attempt to control outcomes, people, and even our bodies to ward off discomfort. But control is finite, and trying to dominate every variable is exhausting. The paradox is that as you surrender the illusion of total control, you actually gain more influence over what matters, your responses, your practices, and your priorities. Choose to put your energy where it yields returns. You cannot manage others' choices, but you can choose how you respond to them. You cannot predict how the world will unfold, but you can prepare your inner resources for whatever appears. One practical exercise is to identify 3 areas you can genuinely influence today and apply effort there. Let other concerns fall into a watch folder you will check at a future date. This triage preserves capacity for meaningful action rather than scattering it across 1,000 hypotheticals. Resentment is a slow-burning toxin that masquerades as moral righteousness. Holding on to grievances implies you remain invested in the emotional currency of the person who hurt you. Freeing yourself of resentment is not condoning the act, it is refusing to let it continue to take your life. Replace rumination with boundary work, ask what you need to feel safe and then enforce it. If forgiveness is for your peace, boundaries are for your safety. They work together. You can forgive while still protecting yourself from further harm. Letting go of the need for approval is another vital step toward peace. Seeking validation from others keeps you on a treadmill that never arrives at satisfaction because external approval is fickle and conditional. Build a practice of internal calibration. Before seeking feedback, ask yourself what you already know to be true. Find 3 internal metrics that matter: effort, alignment with values, and consistency, and measure your choices against them. When your internal compass gains authority, external praise becomes a pleasant bonus rather than the foundation of your worth. There is an important difference between healthy ambition and the drive that feeds insecurity. Ambition anchored to purpose and curiosity thrives. Ambition anchored to external validation collapses in the face of inevitable setbacks. Choose goals that align with your values and let them guide your choices rather than the shifting tides of public opinion. Finally, think of identity as something you curate, not something you inherit fully formed. You are not stuck with versions of yourself you have outgrown. Release outdated stories with compassion and curiosity. Journal a new identity into existence by describing the person you are becoming, their habits, their tone, how they treat others, and how they treat themselves. Then pick one small behavior that aligns with that identity and practice it tomorrow. Identity is built by repeated acts. If you want to become lighter, begin by moving your shoulders differently, by pausing before reacting, and by choosing one moment of presence each day. If guidance or a steady resource has helped you on this path, imagine it as a practical companion that nudges you toward clearer choices and sustainable action. Think of that support as the reliable voice of Momentum Audiobooks encouraging steady progress. You spend a surprising portion of your life outside of life itself, rehearsing future conversations, regretting old ones, or waiting for a moment that feels safer than now. The present is where life actually happens, but it is also the place we learn to be brave with simplicity. The work of living here starts with small, repeated acts, paying attention to what's in front of you, noticing how your body feels, and returning your mind to the breath whenever it drifts. This is not an elegant spiritual performance, it's a practical recalibration that reduces suffering and increases clarity. When you practice presence, you discover that the future you fear is rarely as catastrophic as imagined and the past you mourn is less dominant than you believed. Most anxious scenarios are drafts written by the mind without evidence. Most regrets are memories rehearsed into permanence. You do not erase them by force, you dilute their power by noticing them without identification. The feeling arrives. You observe it. You say, "My mind is rehearsing." You breathe. Then you act in the world. Over time, the mind learns that noticing is enough to defuse its alarms. Start with micro-practices that fit your life. Before you check a screen in the morning, pause for 3 conscious breaths. When you walk from one room to another, feel each step. At meals, put down utensils between bites and taste the texture of food. These small interruptions of autopilot are not sacrificial duties, they are invitations to return home to yourself. You will miss it sometimes, that is part of the practice. Each gentle return is a quiet win. Gratitude is a present-centered tool that shifts your lens from lack to noticing. It is not about forced cheerfulness or ignoring hardship, it is about choosing which details you focus on. When you look for one small thing that went well, your mind begins cataloging positives alongside negatives. Over months, this recalibration matters. It doesn't fix hard circumstances, but it changes your capacity to respond. You become less reactive and more resourceful. Another practical way to live now is to narrow your attention field. The human brain became powerful by focusing on what matters and ignoring what doesn't. When you scatter attention across countless possibilities, overwhelm follows. Choose one project, one conversation, one practice, and give it your full presence. Quality beats quantity. Depth beats surface multiplication. This single-minded focus produces results and reduces the habitual drag of trying to hold 10 things in mind simultaneously. Forgiveness is one of the present's most generous acts. It frees you from carrying historical burdens into new moments. Forgiving does not mean forgetting or excusing harm. It means refusing to anchor your present life to someone else's past action. Imagine the space you reclaim when anger and resentment no longer get a seat at your table. You will still remember. You will still set boundaries as needed. But you won't let yesterday's hurt dictate today's possibility. To practice letting go through forgiveness, try a short ritual in which you name the harm, acknowledge how it affected you, and then say aloud that you will no longer let it define the boundaries of your present. This is not an external act for them to witness, it's a private decision you make to reclaim your energy. The internal economy of attention is finite. When you stop paying interest on old debt, you can invest in growth. Embracing imperfection is another essential present skill. Try an experiment, commit publicly to producing a first draft or a prototype, and accept that it will not be perfect. The social pressure for polish is strong because public perception feels like survival. Yet the opposite is true. When you show up raw and real, you invite collaboration and growth. People respond to authenticity. Imperfection is human and therefore relatable. It builds the trust that polished performance often hides. Perfectionism hides behind noble intentions, quality, care, responsibility, but it often camouflages avoidance. Waiting for everything to be just so is a way to avoid the risk of being judged. Reframe the intent. If your aim is to learn, create, and contribute, then imperfection is the necessary currency. Each attempt teaches you something true that no rehearsal could reveal. Failures become data and momentum rather than moral indictments. Fear is a faithful but overzealous bodyguard. It is wired to keep you safe from immediate physical danger, not to micromanage creative risk or emotional vulnerability. To reduce fear's authority, practice curiosity. When fear arises, ask one simple, neutral question: what is the smallest step I can take that matters? The question narrows the horizon from paralyzing unknowns to manageable micro-action. The physiological response softens because the brain now perceives a path forward rather than an unsolvable threat. If fear is loud, use the opposite muscle. Courage is often a matter of motion. Action does not erase fear, it changes what fear can do. Each time you move despite a trembling body, you build a new story in your nervous system. Fear does not equal stoppage. Over time, these experiences rearrange what feels safe and possible. Control offers the illusion of certainty in exchange for the cost of flexibility. People tighten their grip thinking more control equals less pain, but life's complexity resists such containment. Take control where it matters, your energy, your words, your routines, and loosen it elsewhere. Create a buffer for the uncontrollable, a ritual, a contingency plan, a trusted friend you can call. These measures protect you without trying to run the weather. Practice a simple daily triage to limit the appetite for control. Each morning, choose 3 things you will influence that day. Do them well. Let the rest be observed, not solved. This reduces decision fatigue and keeps your bandwidth focused where it has leverage. Letting go of the need for approval is liberating because it returns your worth to you. When your value is externally determined, your mood becomes reactive to other people's feedback. Instead, choose 3 internal metrics you care about: effort, integrity, and learning, and measure yourself by those standards. When praise comes, enjoy it. When critique arrives, examine it for truth, not threat. External approval becomes a signal to consider, not the ledger that defines your identity. Resilience is not about being unbreakable. It is about being reparable. Think of yourself like an instrument that can be tuned and fixed. When you lose your center, use rituals that restore you: a walk in the late light, a conversation with someone who sees you without agenda, a short period of movement, or a page of journaling that empties noise onto paper. These practices are not merely quaint. They reset the nervous system, returning you to a place where good decisions are possible again. Boundaries are a form of self-honoring that keeps your life sustainable. They are not aggressive walls but elegant gates that determine what you allow into your day. Saying no is not cruelty when the yes would cost your health. Boundaries teach other people how to show up for you, and they conserve the resources you need to be present for what truly matters. When you are considering a boundary, phrase it in affirmative terms: I will do X when Y is honored, rather than I will not do X. This framing reduces drama and increases clarity for both parties. Boundaries implemented with calmness and consistency are a demonstration of self-respect, not punishment. The work of transformation is incremental. There is no overnight erasure of old patterns. What changes your life is consistent microactions, pausing to breathe before reacting, choosing one action instead of a dozen ruminations, telling one truth you have been avoiding, or setting one boundary you have been postponing. Momentum compounds as you add small wins to small wins. Over months, the habits you cultivate reshape your inner weather. A helpful rehearsal for change is to simulate the future you want by acting as if you already belong there. If you want to be calmer, practice calm in small ways now. If you want to be more courageous, take a small risk that aligns with that identity. Acting ahead of your full confidence changes context. The body follows the posture you choose, and the mind follows suit. Finally, be gentle with the parts of you that resist. Change asks more of you than willpower, it asks for kindness toward the imperfect self that is learning. Celebrate small shifts. Notice the ways your energy slows its frantic oscillation. Acknowledge that learning to let go is a lifelong project with seasons of progress and relapse. Treat each relapse as data, not failure. What triggered you, what pattern reasserted itself, and what micro-adjustment might interrupt the sequence next time. If you ever need a practical companion to remind you of these steps, imagine it as a steady guide that helps you turn insight into action. Think of it as the persistent, calmly encouraging voice of Momentum Audiobooks nudging you to take the next small, decisive step. You have spent time learning the mechanics of release, noticing thoughts, naming the critic, setting small deadlines, deciding where to put your energy. Now the work turns softer and deeper. It asks you to live those practices as style rather than emergency tactics. This is the everyday art of becoming lighter. It is less about sudden catharsis and more about small, meaningful shifts that reorder how you treat yourself and others. Let this section be a companion for the quieter practices that sustain change long after motivation fades. Start with the language you use about yourself. Words scaffold identity. When you repeatedly say, "I'm broken," or "I'm always this way," you train your nervous system to perform that script. Replace verdicts with descriptions so you can change the story without self-betrayal. Say, "I am someone who struggles with X," or "I am learning to do Y." These phrases create possibility. They do not deny the difficulty, they name the current condition and leave room for growth. Over weeks, subtle shifts in phrasing alter internal momentum. The grammar of your inner speech becomes the architecture of your future behavior. Practice small acts of self-compassion. Do not wait for crisis to be kind to yourself. When criticism arises, respond with a short, sincere phrase that acknowledges and soothes, "This was hard, I did the best I could with what I knew." Then take one minimal reparative action, a breath, a glass of water, 5 minutes of movement, or a note to yourself listing one thing done well that day. These tiny rituals are the emotional equivalent of rest stops on a long trip. They prevent burnout and keep perspective intact. Rituals anchor psychological shifts into the body. Choose a simple daily practice that signals presence and care, a morning breath set, a short walk without devices, or a 2-minute gratitude pause before sleep. Rituals do not need grandeur or spiritual language, they only need consistency and meaning. When the action repeats, the brain learns to expect calm at that time. Over months, the ritual becomes a reliable doorway into steadiness that you can step through even on chaotic days. Invite curiosity to replace judgment. Curiosity reframes mistakes as experiments and setbacks as data. When something goes wrong, ask a neutral question like, "What happened here? What did I try? What will I try next?" Questions reduce shame because they redirect the mind from moralizing to analyzing. A curious mind leans toward solutions, not condemnation. The tone of a question is softer than the tone of an accusation, and that softness invites creativity and resilience. Forgiveness deserves a separate invitation. Not because it is easy, but because it is often misunderstood. Forgiveness is not a one-off event you perform and then forget. It is a practice you return to when memories arise. It is a choice to stop running the tape of hurt. Practically, you can meet forgiveness with 3 small acts. First, name the wound clearly and honestly. Second, acknowledge how it shaped you and the ways you still carry it. Third, declare the boundary that keeps you safe now. These 3 moves do not erase the past, they reframe it so it no longer dictates your present. If reconciliation is possible and healthy, it is a separate conversation. Forgiveness for your sake does not require restoration of the old relationship. Build courage through progressive exposure. If fear keeps you from the life you want, schedule micro-challenges that stretch your threshold without overwhelming it. For instance, if public speaking terrifies you, start by reading 3 lines aloud to a friend. Next, record a short clip and listen back. Then present for 5 minutes in a trusted small group. Each step creates a new memory that says, I can survive this and learn from it. The accumulation of these small tolerances rewires fear from a stop sign into a signal, proceed with care. Over time, courage stops depending on feeling fearless and starts depending on acting anyway. Trust grows from repeatable evidence. If trust in yourself or others feels thin, manufacture tiny, safe chances to practice reliability. Keep small promises to yourself and others. Show up 5 minutes early. Finish the habit you said you would do that day. These micro-fulfillments are deposits into your trust account. Over time, you stop needing big proofs and begin to accept a stable rhythm of competence and goodwill. Community matters. The solitary work of release is easier within sustainable relationships. Choose people who model the qualities you want to cultivate: honesty without cruelty, curiosity without dismissal, boundaries without coldness. Community is not a cure-all, but the right companions accelerate change. Share 1 or 2 practices with a friend and ask them to practice alongside you. The shared experience normalizes relapse and reaffirms progress. When you know someone else understands the struggle, shame diminishes and resilience grows. Design your environment to support release. Small changes reduce friction for healthier choices. Create a designated device-free corner for rest. Keep a notebook where you can perform the thought purge. Place a photo or a tactile object that reminds you to breathe where you often look at it. Environment is an invisible architecture that either supports or undermines your intentions. When your habitat cooperates, you need less willpower to act in alignment with your values. Learn to steward attention like money. Where you look and what you listen to shape your inner life. Curate your inputs. Reduce news or social feeds that consistently pull you into doom loops. Increase practices that expand perspective, a book that challenges gently, a podcast that deepens curiosity, conversations that leave you thoughtful rather than depleted. The economy of attention is finite, spend it with intention. Set clear rules for decision triage. When you are tempted to reopen old debates in your head, enforce a mental policy. Limit active worry to a single time block each day or week and then close it. For example, give yourself 20 minutes to process a recurring concern, then move to a constructive action or schedule a later time to revisit if needed. This containment helps the mind feel heard without encouraging endless replay. Practice compassionate confrontation. When you need to address someone about a boundary or hurt, prepare the conversation by writing down the core message in 1 or 2 sentences. Speak from your experience using I language. State the need clearly and the consequence that follows if it is ignored. Consequence is not punishment, it is a statement of how you will preserve your well-being. Then close the conversation by asking a clarifying question. Practice can make directness feel more humane and less reactive. Watch your metrics for sacrifice. Noble endurance can be a cover for hidden compromises that erode joy. Ask yourself, what have I stopped doing so another person can feel comfortable? What costs am I accepting because I fear conflict? Answering these questions with honesty gives you a map to reclaim the parts of your life you ceded away. Reclaiming does not always mean confrontation, sometimes you simply bring back small elements of your life that were shelved. Extend patience to the timeline of change. Nervous systems and relational patterns recalibrate slowly. Expect progress to be non-linear. Celebrate the small wins and treat relapses as information. Ask, what is this relapse telling me about my triggers and edges? Then design a micro-intervention for the next time that pattern arises. Over time, these iterative adjustments accumulate into durable change. Anchor your days with meaningful transitions. Ritualize endings and beginnings, a 5-minute walk to signal the end of work, a short breath practice before launching into a difficult conversation, a note of gratitude as you close the day. These transitions help your nervous system know when one activity is complete and another begins. They reduce the bleed of anxiety from one domain into another and allow you to be more present where you are. Finally, keep a soft curiosity about your future self. Imagine the person you want to be in 5 years and write a brief paragraph describing their daily habits, their tone with others, and the boundaries they honor. Then choose one action tomorrow that aligns with that description. Identity precedes behavior in small increments. Act toward the self you hope to become and the habits will follow. If guidance or a steady resource helped you move through this work, imagine that support as a trusted practical ally, a steady voice that helps translate insight into daily action. Picture it as the encouraging, reliable presence of Momentum Audiobooks reminding you to take the next small, meaningful step. You have learned many of the practical moves: pause, breathe, name the thought, set a deadline, or write the angry letter you never send. Now the practice asks for steadiness. It invites you to turn those techniques into habits that soften how you live, not only how you react when things break. This part is about integration, bringing the skills you've practiced into daily rhythms so they become the background hum of a life that is less reactive and more intentional. Start with the small adjustments that alter the day's temperature. Before your phone becomes the first thing you touch, give yourself 2 deep breaths and a clear intention for the morning. Intention is not a heavy plan, it is a phrase that orients your attention. It can be as simple as, today I will be present to one thing at a time, or today I will notice and not judge. That sentence acts like a lens. When noise gets loud, your intention pulls your attention back. Over time, a repeated intention changes the shape of a day and, with enough repetition, the shape of your life. When stress rises, slow down the rhythm of your response. Our systems are wired to escalate quickly, a spike of adrenaline, a flood of thoughts, a cascade of reaction. Training yourself to breathe deliberately in those first moments interrupts the physiological chain reaction. Breath is a basic but powerful lever. Longer exhales, a lengthened pause between in and out, breaks the urgency and gives your prefrontal cortex a chance to re-engage. With that small pause, you can choose a response instead of reflexively replaying an old script. Make room for restorative pauses throughout the day. These are not earned luxuries, they are maintenance. Short stretches, a 5-minute walk without devices, a few minutes of quiet sitting, or simply closing your eyes and listening to the sounds around you are tiny investments that compound. They reset your nervous system and allow you to return to tasks with better clarity and less reactivity. When life stacks demands, the pause is your most economical resource. Practice microvulnerability. Choose one small truth you have been softening away and name it to a safe person. It can be as small as admitting you are tired or sharing that a recent decision has left you unsettled. Microvulnerability is different from dramatic confessions because it is proportionate and measured. It trains you to be honest without needing a crisis to justify authenticity. When you practice this form of truth-telling, you build deeper connection and make your internal world less spectacularly secret. Curate your inner listening. The things you choose to hear and read shape your internal weather. Reduce inputs that keep you in a state of alarm, endless outrage cycles, comparison-heavy social feeds, and repetitive criticism. Simultaneously, add a small, nourishing input daily, a short essay that widens perspective, a poem that centers the heart, a conversation that reaffirms dignity. The goal is not to anesthetize yourself against reality but to balance the scale so your default orientation becomes steadier, not more reactive. Practice compassionate curiosity toward triggers. When a particular situation pulls you into old patterns, name it with tenderness: this pushed my old wound. What did it ask of me? What boundary was crossed? Compassionate curiosity avoids self-blame and opens the door to practical adjustments. For example, if certain interactions always empty you, consider a boundary that limits the situation's frequency or duration. Boundaries are acts of preservation, not punishment, and they can be tenderly enforced without drama. Rehearse forgiveness as a repeated choice rather than a one-time event. Memories resurface unpredictably, and when they do, the old charge can return. Decide in advance what releasing that charge looks like for you, a short phrase you say out loud, a breath-based ritual, or a written note you fold and place somewhere symbolic. When the memory returns, perform the chosen act. Repetition trains your nervous system to accept the unhooking as normal rather than exceptional. Lean into the awkwardness of authentic beginnings. Starting something new rarely feels tidy. The first attempts will be rough. The habit that matters is not perfection of the beginning but persistence. Show up with curiosity and treat early missteps as data. If you want to write, write bad paragraphs. If you want to exercise, move badly at first. If you want to speak publicly, begin with an audience of one. Each imperfect attempt teaches you what to do differently next time. Surrender is often misunderstood as giving up. In practice, surrender is selective letting go. It is the decision to stop fighting variables you cannot change so you can marshal your energy on those you can. You do not surrender responsibility, you surrender the illusion that you can control outcomes. That paradox releases enormous energy. The work of your day becomes clearer when you stop trying to manage the uncontrollable and instead place your attention on actions that have real effects. Create a short evening practice for release. As the day ends, set aside 5 minutes to review without judgment, what went well, what felt heavy, and one small action for tomorrow. This quick ritual closes the day's mental loops so they are less likely to replay at night. It is not a full therapy session, it is a tight, practical debrief that keeps your mind from piling yesterday's unfinished business onto tomorrow's fresh agenda. Reinforce identity by choosing one descriptive sentence about who you want to be and acting in small ways that confirm it. Identity is not an abstract claim, it is a pattern of repeated choices. If your sentence is "I am someone who shows up calmly under pressure," practice small exposures where calm is the option you choose. If it is "I am someone who values clarity," practice saying one clear thing in conversations where you'd usually avoid the subject. These microbehaviors solidify the self you are building. Practice inventory at regular intervals. Every month, take 20 minutes to ask, what's lighter? What's still heavy? What patterns are showing up? What small adjustments might release the next layer? This cadence of reflection keeps you from wandering in slow drift. It turns intention into iteration and helps you notice the compound effects of small shifts. Cultivate compassionate accountability. Choose 1 or 2 people who will tell you the truth with care and ask them to check in on a specific habit you want to build. Accountability isn't about pressure, it's about alignment. When someone knows you are practicing, you are more likely to persist. Select people who can hold the line gently, those who will remind you of your intention when you forget without shaming you for the relapse. Remember that growth rarely follows a straight line. Progress is knotty, with leaps and stalls. When you backslide, treat it as information. Which trigger returned? Which boundary slipped? What tiny step, practiced differently, would nudge the pattern the other way next time? Replace the harsh narrative of failure with a scientist's curiosity about cause and effect. If you ever find yourself stuck in a heavy cycle, return to 3 essentials: breathe to calm the system, act on the smallest possible step to build momentum, and connect to someone who reflects your worth. These 3 moves are surprisingly potent because they address physiology, behavior, and relational context at once. As you integrate these practices, be mindful to celebrate the small shifts. A lighter step, a clearer boundary, a day where you spent more time present than absent, these are the measures of change. They compound into a life that is less labor and more living. If any influence has guided you through these changes, picture it as a steady companion that reminds you to turn insight into habit, imagine that companion as the practical, encouraging voice of momentum audiobooks helping you keep the next small promise to yourself. You are nearing the place where practice becomes habit and habit becomes a new default. This section invites you to consolidate gains and look ahead with a steady, compassionate strategy for staying free from old weights. The work is not finishing, it is learning how to carry forward the tools so they remain available when life grows complex again. Think of this part as maintenance, the routines, mindsets, and small systems that keep you lighter over time. First, tend to your nervous system with intention. Your ability to let go is not purely mental, it is physiological. Chronic stress narrows perspective and amplifies reactivity, making old patterns easier to slip into. A practical rhythm reduces that risk. Prioritize sleep in earnest, not as an optional luxury but as the foundation of clarity. Move your body in ways that feel good, even briefly, to circulate tension out of your system. Eat with moderation and kindness, favoring rituals that signal care rather than punishment. These are not moral edicts, they are scaffolding that keeps the mind capable of the subtle, sustained work of release. Next, build a bookshelf of practices you can reach for when you feel the pull of old habits. Some tools quiet the storm quickly, a sequence of breaths, a 5-minute walk, a brief paragraph of unedited writing. Others require a longer arc, weekly journaling to map recurring themes, a monthly emotional inventory to unpack new layers, or periodic therapy to get external perspective on stubborn patterns. Keep a menu of options, fast, medium, and long, and practice moving from quick interventions to deeper work when needed. The discipline is not to be perfect, it is to have choices. Strengthen your decision architecture. One reason we slip back into heavy habits is decision fatigue. When your willpower is taxed, the brain defaults to familiar grooves. Reduce daily friction by automating what you can and clarifying what you must decide in the moment. Simple rules free your attention, a morning ritual that sets the tone, a 3-item to-do list that keeps action manageable, and a nightly debrief that prevents old stories from echoing overnight. The less cognitive clutter you carry, the more capacity you have to respond rather than react. Keep practicing boundary hygiene. Boundaries are not one-time signs, they require upkeep. When you notice fatigue after certain people or contexts, tidy your limits. Check in with yourself about how much availability you are offering and whether it aligns with your reserves. It's normal for boundaries to feel uncomfortable at first, people test them. Stay consistent and calm. The discomfort of clarity is often shorter than the chronic drain of ambiguity. Cultivate the habit of small, decisive acts. Grand gestures are memorable, but the durable architecture of a lighter life is built from repeated small choices. Choose one modest discipline that matters to your well-being and do it daily for a month. It might be 5 minutes of morning writing, a short walk after lunch, or a weekly call with a supportive friend. Track it simply and celebrate the streaks. Habit stacks, pairing a new practice with an existing routine, make follow-through easier. Over time, these small acts aggregate into a life that feels more spacious. Practice realistic compassion. The kind, tough, and clear self you need is not indulgent or harsh, it is both firm and kind. When relapse happens, avoid self-flagellation. Instead, be precise about what triggered you, what pattern repeated, and what micro-adjustment could redirect the course next time. This curiosity with accountability preserves dignity while producing useful data. It keeps the teaching, not the shaming, at the center. Hold a flexible relationship with identity. The person who learned to release is still learning. Don't anchor your worth to flawless performance. Instead, anchor identity to a process. I am someone who learns, repairs, and tries again. That phrasing removes the pressure for perfection and gives permission to keep evolving. Identity is a narrative you can edit intentionally through small consistent acts. Lean into connective repair when possible. When harms have occurred and relationships matter, practice accountable conversations that balance honesty with generosity. Own what you did, communicate the impact calmly, propose a repair, and then allow time for trust to rebuild. Reconciliation is a process and it requires evidence of change. Protect yourself with boundaries while making space for genuine repair if both parties are willing to do the work. Choose progressive exposure for growth. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the ability to act in its presence. Design a sequence of exposures that stretch you just beyond comfort, not so far that you shut down. Each step accumulates evidence that you can survive and learn. Celebrate those small risks. Over months, your tolerance expands and fear loses its veto power. Guard your inner circle. People you spend time with shape the edge of who you become. Prioritize relationships that model emotional competence, people who speak frankly without cruelty, who keep promises, and who hold your confidence responsibly. Let the loud, chronic critics remain periphery influences rather than close collaborators. Curate interactions so that your main social inputs reflect the values and energy you want to inhabit. Practice micro-celebrations. Too often we defer praise for a hypothetical future achievement. Instead, notice small wins now. A day you spent more present than absent, a boundary you enforced with calm, a moment you chose curiosity over blame, these deserve acknowledgement. Small celebrations release dopamine and reinforce the behaviors you want. Make the habit of pausing for 30 seconds to name one thing that went better than it might have, and notice how that informs your next action. Be precise about your commitments. When you set an intention to change, commit in concrete, observable ways. Telling yourself and others vague promises is a recipe for erosion. Instead, pick measurable steps, schedule them, and tell one supportive person. The social and temporal structure increases follow-through. Consider the role of purpose. Letting go is easier to sustain when linked to a broader, meaningful aim. What larger aspiration benefits from your lightness? Maybe it is being a more present parent, creating a creative body of work, or simply enjoying days with less internal friction. When you tether daily practices to this purpose, small sacrifices feel sensible rather than punitive. Purpose becomes a compass when the winds of uncertainty blow. Make space for play and rest. A life uncluttered by heavy emotional load is not simply more efficient, it is more joyful. Prioritize activities that replenish you, not because they are productive but because they reawaken aliveness. Play loosens the nervous system, sparks creativity, and gives you room to breathe. Rest is an investment in resilience, not a reward for productivity. Keep learning. The path of release is not a one-time course, it is an ongoing curriculum. Read, listen, and be curious about new frameworks and practices. Different seasons of life demand different tools. Stay open to refinement and to the humility of not having a final answer. When setbacks arrive, use ritual to rehabilitate your momentum. A short, structured reset, 10 minutes of focused breathing, 5 minutes of journaling to name what happened, and one tiny corrective action, can halt a slide and return you to forward motion. The goal is not to perfect the timeline but to interrupt the descent and re-enter practice. Finally, commit to generosity, a softer, outward-facing practice that lightens the inner load. Acts of service, small kindnesses, and listening without trying to fix everything are ways to stretch your heart and refocus attention outward. Generosity does not erase boundaries, it operates within them. When you act kindly from a place of fullness rather than depletion, the act sustains you as much as it helps others. If you have found guidance or a steady companion helpful on this journey, imagine that presence as a reliable source of practical reminders and humble encouragement. Think of it as the consistent, prudent voice of Momentum Audiobooks that keeps you oriented toward the small, durable choices that create a lighter life. You are at the last stretch of this sequence not because the work is finished but because you now have a fuller map. The final piece is about weaving everything together so that learning does not remain an event but becomes the way you live. Let this ending be practical, warm, and slightly insistive. The habits you choose daily will define the life you experience, and the small investments in presence, boundaries, and courage compound into a life that feels lighter and truer. Begin with a commitment to coherence. Coherence is when your actions, words, and inner life are aligned enough that you stop wasting energy covering contradictions. If you value presence, choose one daily practice that cultivates it and gift it protected time. If you value gentleness, permit yourself one compassionate phrase to repeat when self-criticism surfaces. Coherence does not require perfection, it requires repeatability. The simplest way to build it is to pick one tiny habit that represents a larger value and repeat it daily until it feels like part of who you are. This creates a bridge from intention to identity. Make your commitments visible and sensible. Put a short sentence on a sticky note where you will see it each morning. Today I choose one small thing that keeps me lighter. Or write the phrase on your phone lock screen. Visual cues keep your intention in the foreground and make it easier to choose the small action when the moment arrives. Pair the cue with a tiny behavior, a breath, a 2-minute journal prompt, a 5-minute walk, and you complicate the habit in gentle ways that ensure it sticks. Honor the seasons of change. There will be periods when the work of letting go feels active and abrupt, setting boundaries, ending relationships, or changing careers. There will be seasons when the practice is quieter, tending rituals, repairing trust, and reinforcing new habits. Both are essential. Learn to read your life like weather and choose practices appropriate to the season. When storms come, prioritize recovery, sleep, safety, and trusted companionship. When days are steady, invest in creative expansion and deeper curiosity. The skill lies in matching your practice to your present capacity. Keep an experimenter's stance. You will not get everything right the first time. The most helpful way to respond to setbacks is to ask low-stakes questions that inform the next attempt. What worked? What didn't? What small tweak could make the process more humane next time? Replace binary judgments with iterative curiosity. This stance makes learning less painful and more effective. Make space for grief and celebration in equal measure. When you let go of something heavy, there is often a residue of loss. Recognize that releasing does not always feel like relief immediately, sometimes it feels like loneliness or regret. Hold those feelings without catastrophizing them. Allow yourself to grieve where needed and mark endings with small rituals that honor what was real. At the same time, cultivate rituals of celebration for the micro-progresses, a lighter week, a boundary upheld, a courage practiced. Naming these wins reinforces the new pathways you are building. Practice a clarity audit regularly. Once a month, ask yourself 3 questions in a quiet space. Where am I carrying weight that could be released? What small boundary could I implement that would conserve my energy? What one tiny action would make tomorrow easier? Write the answers and choose one to act on within 24 hours. This audit prevents drift because it translates awareness into tangible next steps. Nurture trustworthy connections. Letting go is not solely an interior feud, it is relational. Choose a handful of people who reflect your aspiring qualities and spend time with them. Deep, steady relationships are not about endless excitement, they are about predictable refuge. Prioritize a short list of people whose presence leaves you steadier and more like yourself. Invest the time you can afford in those relationships with small, consistent acts, a text that says I'm thinking of you, a short call, or a shared walk. Over time, these small investments become the network that supports your lighter life. Guard your creative and restful margins. A life without margin is a life where heaviness returns quickly. Resist the cultural pressure to optimize every minute. Protect non-productive time, reading, daydreaming, digesting food, sitting quietly. These margins are where insight and regeneration happen. When you consistently protect them, your decisions come from replenishment rather than scarcity. Revisit your relationship to failure. Let it be emphatically clear, failure is part of the curriculum, not the capstone. Treat mistakes as early signals, not final judgments. When something doesn't go as hoped, do a short debrief. What happened? What part was within your control? What small fix could you try next? Record one learning point and move on. This practice reduces shame and accelerates growth. Practice generosity with boundaries. Boundaries can feel stern, but their tender application creates safety for both parties. When you set a limit, you are not doing it to punish, you are preserving the capacity for healthier connection. State the need clearly, act kindly, and allow the other person to respond. Sometimes they will not change, and the boundary will stand alone. Sometimes they will respond with respect and care. Both outcomes are information and both are acceptable. Lean into small acts of courage. Courage compounds the way compound interest does. When you choose the smaller brave acts consistently, saying no when needed, asking for help, sharing a modest truth, you widen the channel for bolder moves later. Courage is less about dramatic heroics and more about steady fidelity to the small truths that matter. Keep a practice of recalibration after encounters that disturb you. When a conversation leaves you unsettled, take a short pause before you reply or respond. Breathe, notice the sensations in your body, and ask what you need to keep your center. If action is required, choose the smallest possible corrective step. Often, small, measured responses diffuse escalation and preserve dignity. Use your creativity for internal repair. Artists, writers, cooks, and gardeners often know intuitively how to transform raw material into something new. View your inner life the same way. Pain can be a resource for art, for service, or for deeper insight. Channeling emotional energy into a craft or a small project transforms it into tangible outputs rather than rumination. This is not about productivity for productivity's sake but about honoring internal material by giving it a form. Teach what you learn. One of the fastest ways to consolidate change is to explain it to someone else. Share a habit, a micro-practice, or a perspective with a friend. Teaching requires clarity and often reveals nuances that deepen your own understanding. It also creates social reinforcement. When you share knowledge, you are more likely to practice it. Stay curious about the unknown future. Letting go of control does not mean giving up on planning. It means planning from a place of flexibility. Maintain goals that orient you, but design them with contingency and room to change. Convert rigid expectations into adaptive intentions. I aim to achieve X, but I will adjust as needed. This stance reduces the anxiety of fixed outcomes and increases your capacity to move gracefully when circumstances shift. Honor the quiet victories of longevity. The real change is durable only when it survives boredom and repetition. The small practices that feel mundane are the ones that transform a life. Over months and years, they become the climate in which new versions of you emerge. Trust the slow work of accumulation. When in doubt, default to presence. Presence is the simplest form of love for yourself and for others. It is the act of giving attention, steadiness, and a listening heart. Presence is not heroic or flashy. It is practical and profoundly effective. In moments of hesitation, ask, what would presence look like here? Then do that. Finally, build a final ritual that marks your ongoing commitment. It can be a short weekly practice, a 5-minute review, a gratitude list, a vow reread, or a small act of self-care that you will not skip. Treat that ritual as a small altar to your future lightness. Show up for it even when you do not feel like it. The ritual becomes a signal to your nervous system that you are active in your own life. You are not expected to be perfect. You are invited to be consistent. The art of letting go is not an outcome you arrive at once, it is a way of living that you practice. Choose gentleness for the parts of you that resist and firmness for the boundaries you need. Keep your curiosity awake, your commitment small and reliable, and your community close enough to hold you steady. If any guidance or resource has been helpful along this path, imagine it as a reliable companion that nudges you to keep making small, durable choices rather than dramatic leaps alone. Think of that steady reminder as the encouraging, actionable presence of Momentum Audiobooks that helps you come back to the next right step.